Нашу серію прес-брифінгів із огляду чергової порції російських фейків. І презентувати буде Марго Гонтар, редактор та співзасновник проекту StopFake.
Margo Gontar, editor and co-founder of StopFake, will tell us about fresh fakes of Russian propaganda. Good morning, good afternoon. As usual, we present our video digest, but this week we don't have it because of technical reasons. StopFake is an independent organization, and we do have some problems because of this, because we have lack of finance, and we hope that next week everything will come back to normal. So at the moment I'll tell you about several fakes that we spotted, and I'd like to have a photo on the screen. This is the Russian consulate in Geneva. In their official Twitter, they published this picture. At the moment, it's been removed from there. You see Ukrainian and Nazi banners, and they said that human rights are as their height. And now the second picture. This is a picture from 2011, and this picture was taken. We see the screenshot, a frame, an episode from the street Universitetska, Krugla Universitetska, and they were shooting the film Match. And thank you, the Russian consulate in Geneva, they have removed this picture already. Another thing, this is the information published by Yelena Vasilyeva on her site. This is the Russian public activist who is engaged in Gruz 200, load 200, cargo 200 in her Facebook and Facebook community. So she's got a quote from her origins, from her sources, about some Russian military who were dismissed from service after they have been killed or wounded in Ukraine. So this, to her mind, is one of the proofs about Russian participation in Ukraine, in the war in Ukraine. And she published this after Cargo 200 or dead bodies came to Orenburg region. But the matter is that this, actually, the surnames are the same as in Gazovik and Gazovik 2 football teams in Orenburg, and some of them are already playing in other teams. And Viktor Karpukhin said that he ignored this information. Actually, it didn't impact on him, but he was already contacted because his surname was on the list of those who died in Ukraine, allegedly died in Ukraine. Besides, the publication Ural 56 contacted also Nikolai Melnikov, who now plays in Gazovik football team, and he said that he was displeased with the fact that he was buried alive by the Ukrainian media. However, the Gazovik team will not sue Ukrainian media for such news, and this is rather interesting because the Russian media do not say that this information was disseminated by Yelena Vasilyeva, and Russian media say that it was Ukrainian media who disseminated this information. And Nikolai Vasilyev in this case is just a guy who takes this with a pinch of salt. But here we see, and I'd like to tell you about a trend in Russian propaganda that we are observing at the moment, because since open fakes are less and less numerous, because there's a certain reaction in Ukrainian media and organizations like ours, and in some other cases, so they are engaged in manipulative technologies, and as Malygin, a Russian journalist, said that he sees an option that this information was leaked especially because not only the surnames but also dates of birth of those footballers were the same as on the list of those who were killed in Ukraine. So they may be expected that this will be later revealed, and Ukrainian mass media will be again accused of working in a non-professional way and lying. So if, of course, it would be much simpler if we wanted to invent this story, we could just invent the surnames as well than to publish this list. We wanted Yelena Vasilyeva to comment on this situation for us, but over 2 days she didn't respond to our calls. We still could not talk to her. I don't know why she doesn't want to. Another point, last week there was a lot of talk about rallies, and NTV and the Tartas told a lot about rallies in Ukrainian cities, including Odessa, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, and a number of other cities, and they said that thousands of people took part, and they also quoted some slogans like "Stop financing military operations in Donbass," and they asked the Kiev authorities to do this, and as if they were against the official policy of Kiev. However, they did not quote any specific individuals, so this is rather hard to check. Besides, most of the sites of those cities do not tell us much about those rallies. However, Dumskaya.net tells us that there were pensioners who stood there with some placards, and after they talked to each other, they dispersed. Prestupnosti.net tells us about Mykolaiv that most of participants there were adolescents who could not explain what they were doing there. They represented some internationalist party that was not before observed in this city. So we see this trend again. We have a fact, yes, there were such assemblies and people did have some placards, but does this correspond to the opinion that was voiced there? It is very hard to check this because they do not quote any specific interviews or names, and they just quote their own opinion and observations. Besides, we would like to tell you about our apprehensions. Last week, Russia Today, we got to know that Russia Today will get 2.5 more times financing as compared to what they were planning for 2015-17, because they will have also French and German language channels. And we talked to Mr. Schuster, who is a German journalist and who wrote extensively on Putin's policy, and he says that German society is not ready for the attack from pro-Putin's mass media in German. We can also talk to French journalists, but we are apprehensive that at the moment we have some calm, some pause, but later the Russian media will unfold a much more active campaign on new directions. Recently we had a news from the head of the Far Eastern Department of Russia Today, how she was on a conference where no one wanted to talk to her, and she said that this shows that the Russians are doing everything correctly because the West criticizes them. So at the moment it looks like they will aim at transforming Russian media and Russian views as the most correct and, let's say, saintly, as opposed to the demoralized ways West. And to add to this, I'd like to tell you about our publications in the opinions column, the window of overtone, how with 4 simple steps you can legitimize a very absurd idea. First is how, when it is being spoken about by radical elements, and like when during our initial stages of our Maidan, the Russian radicals spoke of fascist Maidan, then the phrases about every thought having the right to existence, we had this in our practice as well. When Sorokin spoke about, then they should find a precedent and extensively tell about this. And in our case, this was Lenin, who was overthrown in many cities. And fourth, it is the arrival at the state level, when people like Lavrov and others start to tell everybody that madness in Kiev, as they put it, should stop. So they create a special sort of reality that should be fed up. And in any case, this is a good example of how this happens. And briefly, we spoke about resources.
And also, I would like to mention very briefly Anti-Corcom UA. They advised not to take we advise not to take seriously their statements because quite often they make bright statements, but you should double check all this information. Also, InfoResist, it was not the resource which was posted by Dmitry Shevchuk, and please separate between these 2 publications. Now questions. Good morning, good afternoon, I'm Evgenia Garka. Now my question. Today in many Russian mass media, they are discussing this topic, newly launched topic about massive burials and tombs. And as far as I remember, Russia has started to persecute General Gilitay. Could you please comment on this situation about search and persecution of Gilitay? It should not surprise you. As far as I know, BBC already commented on these facts. And they commented that one of the pictures was taken from Ukrainian Argumenty Fakte publication immediately after crash of MH777, and when Lavrov mentioned that this grave was discovered and some of them were buried, but nobody made any stories about this. But BBC actually discovered and published that those pictures were published in relation to absolutely different event. There were also statements about killed pregnant women, etc. How to check this information? This could be a lie. I am not ready to answer to the question about pregnant women. We did not check this. We have no facts about this. Then about Dnipro Battalion serviceman who was imprisoned, and he confessed that he was given command and orders to kill civilian people. Let me check this information, and then I will answer later to your question. And one question from me. You mentioned that direct falsifications now and fakes are now substituted with indirect fakes. Could you please develop on this? I think this is quite interesting thing to note that this was noticed also by BBC, and that BBC in general started to reveal the fakes of Russian mass media. I think that up-to-date trend is that Russian media show facts, but they distort the context or provide the they slightly distort the facts, and they shift the emphasis and intentionally want to create a bias against Kiev authorities. Sometimes we feel that it's more useful to provide video or recording, and quite often we see that there is a journalist quoted whose comments we cannot check. Also, sometimes they quite often provide information in such a way that from the very beginning it creates some specifically targeted impression with the listener. And for example, they present that Ukrainian prosecutor's office try to hide any information, not saying that this information is classified for the reasons of investigation. As for that case with information from Yelena Vasilyeva, will you continue your attempts to communicate with her? And we will continue our attempts to communicate with her, because she referred to this case for several times. Thank you very much, and expect to see you next time. The NSC